Good evening, sports fans. Tonight we have as our guest Dan Abrams. I hope I pronounced your last name right, Dan.
Perfect.
Dan Abrams, who is a sports psychologist, and he has his own practice. He has his own sports psychology facility in the UK, and uh, I'm pretty sure he will not tell us who his clients are or who his patients are, but his patients are mostly, please correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, are athletes. Um, Athletes, and the biggest misconception we have, guys, is that these professional athletes or student athletes or amateur athletes are superhuman, that they're impervious to vulnerability and mental health issues. But they're just like you and me. They're also human beings. They laugh, they cry, they whine, they complain, just like us. So this evening we're gonna delve deeper into what are the issues facing athletes since the start of the pandemic. And Dan, thank you for joining us. My first question is, before we went on earlier, I talked to you about Naomi Osaka's situation, and I want to ask you, um, the what happened there? I mean, from what you saw, from what you've read, what do you think happened?
Well, look, firstly, thank you for inviting me onto your show. I'm delighted and honored to be speaking with you and to everybody in the Philippines there. It's interesting that you started off by mentioning that I might not talk about my clients because as a psychologist, you do have confidentiality agreements in place, and quite often, yeah, occasionally clients let you allow you to talk a little bit about the work they've done with you. And I'm saying this in answer to your question because almost the first rule of thumb as a psychologist is never assume anybody's mindset, never assume the situation if you don't know. So my initial answer to that is, look, I don't 100% know, and it would be wrong of me to assume what Naomi Osaka it has been through, is going through, who she is, and her current situation in the landscape there. I really don't know. However, I can speak from a general perspective, and I think you eloquently put it yourself, that no matter the skill in your hands or your feet, obviously depending the sport you're playing, you're competing in, no matter the skill you've got, you're still a human being. And I would also say, no matter how competent your performance psychology is, as in your capacity to focus attention, play with confidence, manage emotions on the court or on the course or on the pitch or on the field, no matter any of that, you're still a human being off of the court, off of the course, off of the pitch. Now, as a human being, we're subject to the sensations, the feelings, the emotions, the thoughts that arise within us. We don't do thoughts and feelings and emotions on purpose. They just rise up. Excuse me. Now, every single person on this planet has their own challenges, has their own unique challenges. We've all got challenges, and we're all going to experience thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations shaped as anxiety or worry or doubt or fear, despondency, in some cases, low mood, depression, and so on and so forth. All of us have the potential. We certainly experience things like anxiety can be on a day-to-day basis, but we can experience things like low mood and depression that are a little bit more serious. It doesn't matter who we are, how much skill we have, what job we've got. It doesn't matter how much money we've got. Ultimately, that can help things, obviously, but it doesn't really matter. The brain and the nervous system don't necessarily care. So what I can say is that the sporting environment, again, no matter how much skill you've got, no matter how successful you are, no matter how much money you've got, the sporting environment is pretty unforgiving. Now, lots of workplace environments are like that. I'm not saying it's unique to sport. However, there is something about sport. It's overt, the overtness of success and failure. Success and failure is in your face all the time. And the better you get and the higher you rank, it's not that there's more pressure on you, it's just there's a certain pressure on you. The perception of the world around you is that you've got to play well all the time. Again, I'm not saying this is anything to do with Naomi, this is just the general sporting landscape. But if we were to talk about Naomi Osaka, you're just talking about a human being who plays tennis, who happens to play tennis very, very well, who is competing in a high pressure environment, which might have something to do with how she's reporting her feelings at the moment. And so subsequently, my understanding is she's saying, hey, I've got to take some time away here, or actually, if I compete, I know I've got these press duties to do, but that's a real struggle for me to do because I've got to answer the kind of questions that right now, for me as a human being, are very difficult to answer. I understand that's part of my duty, but I'm a human being first and foremost. And so my understanding in the French Open, when she had to withdraw, was she was unable to carry out that duty. And so that's the landscape. She's withdrawn from Wimbledon. She's taking time off. And so that's the situation with Naomi. I don't know anything other than that, but that gives you a slight introduction as to, the landscape.
But okay, you've been around sports for a long time and professional athletes, and I'm sure media has had a profound effect on their psyche, on them mentally. Is that in the form of the types of questions they ask? Does media sometimes go over the line, go over the top, I mean, or do they step out of line in the kinds of questions they ask our athletes in order for them to sell papers or to get more views, clicks, and things like that? The types of questions they ask, what effect does that have on the mental side of an athlete?
Look, good question, and it's a broad question. I mean, I think for me, the first thing to say is I respect and appreciate the media, and I think, ultimately the media have a job to do. And like any profession, you're going to get a range of abilities, approaches, ethical journalists with ethical considerations, some who meet those ethical considerations and others who either don't or are a little bit more stretch the ethical considerations, if you like, the responsibility of a journalist. And obviously there are publications who allow that to happen and want that to happen because we live in a noisy world whereby you may have to write articles that could be deemed to be sensationalist or anything like that. So I actually understand the landscape, and I understand why journalists might ask the questions that they ask, sometimes out of pernicious reasons, other times out of genuine curiosity. And we also have to expect and respect in this landscape that, people are curious about high-profile athletes, just as they're curious about high-profile musicians or high-profile movie stars, film stars. So we do have to expect that. So I do think there's a sort of a clash here, a combination that ultimately, if you want to be a sports star, you're going to have to develop the capacity to deal with challenging questions. But coming back to this notion that sports stars are human beings, sometimes they're really good at doing that, and sometimes they're not so good at doing that. One has to, as I say, one has to expect that journalists are going to ask tough questions about that player's game, and about maybe that person's personal life. And as much as sports stars don't want to be asked about their personal life, the reality is they're going to be. So absolutely, of course, the questions and the approaches that the media, that journalists, whether in print or on TV, will take is going to influence how an athlete, a sports professional, feels about themselves, about the world around them. Absolutely, it is going to tap into stress responses. It can be anxiety inducing. Sports stars are human beings, so they can be self-conscious about their situation, whether it's their game, whether it's their life. If they're going, for instance, through, if we're talking about their game, if they're going through a slump in form and they're constantly asked to talk about that slump in form, then that can be difficult to do. Just the other day, I was working with one of my clients who has recently had a very good result in his or her sport. And that person said to me, all of a sudden, I've got people tagging me on Instagram with various manufacturers. So that's not the media, various manufacturers. I've got media people suddenly talking to me about the big events I'm suddenly going to be playing in. That player said to me, that person said to me, now I'm having some doubts and some worries. I'm not so sure anymore. I've lost a bit of confidence. I don't know if I can handle this pressure from the outside world. Now, some people would just say, well, it's not the worst thing that can happen to a human being, tough luck. And that might be a fair thing to say. But ultimately, so yes, they have to be able to deal with it. They've got to learn to deal with it. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that. But they're still human beings. So of course they're going to feel that way. So to answer your question, absolutely. The questions that are asked and the approaches that are taken by the media, whilst are understandable, whilst sometimes are unethical, they do make a difference to how an athlete feels. Maybe in this instance with the person that we're talking about, Naomi Osaka, because she felt that she didn't want to be in front of the world's cameras answering questions, maybe it is the press that exacerbates, that makes her feelings, her thoughts worse. Maybe. So absolutely, Vincent, that's the landscape.
Okay, I'm sure you have had clients or patients who've had problems dealing with failure after failure after failure after debacle after debacle. How about athletes who have a problem with, as maybe as arrogant as this may sound, success or the circumstances surrounding their success or the challenges it presents or it entails? Do you have clients, athlete clients who have a tough time dealing with the repercussions of, it's a good problem, I suppose, winning consistently, winning games, tournaments, and championships?
Absolutely. And, I to be, just referring back to a few minutes ago, that was a prime example of somebody who had some, I'm not going to mention, obviously not going to mention the person, I won't mention the sport, but they had some great success 2 weeks ago. And all of a sudden they've been thrust into the limelight. And that's not always easy to deal with, because suddenly people want, it's a resource challenge as well. People want their attention. People want a piece of them. All of a sudden they've got offers. And as you said, it can, it is a good problem to have in many respects. But human perception is an interesting phenomenon. And whilst to the layperson, to most people, it'd be like, well, why are you complaining? This is great. This is fantastic. It can feel very, very overwhelming when suddenly everybody wants a piece of, your time, your attention. And so subsequently, purely from a performance perspective, it can be actually difficult to maintain your standards because you're being pulled over here, pulled over there, attention displaced over there, attention directed over there, when actually to be able to continue to perform well, like everybody wants you to do and you want to do, you've got to focus on the everyday habits that you've built up to, that's got you into this position in the first place. So your organization becomes imperative, and your capacity to say no becomes important as well. And not everybody is good at saying no. No, I can't do that right now. I have to focus on this. No, I'm going to have to say no to you. That's not what I want. I'm going to have to focus on, I've already got a closed deal here, or and I wouldn't dismiss that as something that isn't stressful, because if we borrowed from personality science, what personality science says to us, there are 5 big traits, human traits: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness, and neuroticism. Now, throwing some psychological jargon at you there, but if I hone in on agreeableness, what agreeableness is: politeness and compassion. Many people on this planet are very high agreeable. High agreeable people find it very stressful to say no to others, to push back, to be selfish, and to focus on themselves. And in many respects, high-level sport requires you to be selfish. And so when you're asked to be selfless, that can be a very stressful situation for some people. So, of course, that can spark some anxiety. From a general performance perspective, when you've been successful, maintaining success, all of a sudden now you've got these people around you, and the expectations of these people rise. They think you're going to maintain it. They think if you've suddenly got into the world's top 100, they think you're going to get into the world's top 50. They then think you're going to get into the world's top 20 or the world's top 10. If you've been transferred from a smaller club to a big club, they expect you now, suddenly there's pressure on you to perform, to stand out in this amazing team. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. And so the expectation of others, and even the expectations you place on yourself, can give rise to anxiety, doubt, worry, fear, stress, essentially. So, of course, success can be very stressful in and of itself.
Okay, do you have child athletes or minors? And these are the clients and patients you can't see by yourself. They have to be with their parents. What are the common challenges or problems they're facing when experiencing or tasting success already at an early age?
Sure. Well, this is a very big topic. Lots of people like to use the word elite, not just in professional sport, but also in child sport. And I think many of us believe that the word elite shouldn't be used, that there's no such thing as an elite child athlete. And my understanding of the research suggests that many children who experience success, in inverted commas, early don't or rarely go on to have success as a professional competitor. So there's not a high positive correlation there. And certainly in my profession, the early seriousness. So early seriousness if a child is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, taking their sport too seriously can be very problematic, very problematic. And so certainly I believe the vast majority of us in my profession try to spread the message of engaging in multiple sports, but there's nothing wrong with engaging in a single sport a great amount of the time. That's fine. It's the early seriousness that's a problem. So retaining a sense of enjoyment, of fun, retaining a sense of this is just a hobby, that at 8 years old you're not a professional. That's a really important I believe standpoint to come from. To answer your question, I personally, as a sports psychologist, try not to work with children under the age of 12 because I don't think it's that necessary for a sports psychologist to work with anybody under that age, because it shouldn't be so serious that a sports psychologist needs to be brought in for a 12-year-old. Now, look, let me just say here, as a slight caveat, there's nothing wrong with a 10-year-old saying, hey, mummy, hey, daddy, hey, coach, I take sport really seriously. I love playing football, and this is really serious to me. One day I want to be a Premier League soccer player, or one day I want to play against the best tennis players in the world at Wimbledon or the French Open, or I want to play in the US Open golf, or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. Or I want to climb into the boxing ring. Nothing wrong with that at all. But it's when outside pressures, parents, coaches, others, put pressure on that child. I think the best response to a child who takes their sport really seriously is, we're here to support you. I want you to enjoy it. I want to give you the opportunity to enjoy the game, to play, improve, and we'll help you out in any way that we can. If you want to stop playing, you can stop playing. And then over time, as they get older, maybe the dial of seriousness is turned up and different processes are introduced into that environment. But at 12 years old and under, I wouldn't really engage with a child. What I might do is engage with parents and talk to them in this manner, advise them on what the research says, advise them on the best way to communicate with their child who is engaging in sport and is perhaps engaging seriously in their sport. I think a lot of my work at that age group is done with and through parents, with and through coaches. I think in your coaches in their role need to optimize their ability to deliver psychology in their coaching role. And I think that that's what sports psychologists can help them with. Now, over 12 years old, 13, 14, 15, that landscape changes slightly, in my opinion. I might start to help a young player have a soft introduction to the kind of psychological techniques and tools that I work on with the very best players in the world, but just a very soft introduction, and then build from there. So important to me from an ethical standpoint is we just be careful about the seriousness with which we're helping the child engage in their sport with.
Your sense, I want to get your sense on leagues and sports associations. Are they slowly opening up to talking about mental health? Do athletes still hesitate on talking about their mental health issues? Is it still a taboo?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think several things to say here. I think, look, I mean, geez, the landscape is so much better than it was a decade ago, so much better even than it was 5 years ago. People are taking it seriously. I think that is maybe one of the good things that social media has done. I know people talk about the dark side of social media. I think this is the light side of social media. I think this is something social media has helped to spread the word about the importance of considering mental health within the sporting landscape from a participative and a competitive perspective. So I think it's getting a lot better. I think there's a lot of individual differences, Vincent. I really do. I think there are always going to be people who are upfront about their mental health challenges. There are others who are going to have mental health challenges and keep it to themselves and deal with it privately. There are going to be others who have mental health challenges and just keep it to themselves. And there's going to be others who, I don't want to say aren't believers in mental health or such a thing exists. But there's going to be a raft of opinions and attitudes. There always is. But I think that landscape has changed. I think what I'd like to say here is that perhaps in sport and sports psychology, we need to be better at helping people understand what sports psychology is, what psychology is within sport. And by that, I mean, when I sit down and I talk to coaches to help them understand this landscape, I'm often talking about 3 different levels from a psychological perspective for participants and competitors in sport. At the very top level is performance psychology, with individuals, with teams, with groups, with organizations. And the performance psychology piece is the learning, the engagement, the learning, the competitive piece. That's the paying attention on court. It's helping somebody build confidence to play football. It's helping somebody who walks into the boxing ring and is able to manage their emotions. It's skill acquisition. It's a part of coaching science. So it's very much the learning and the performance side of things. Underneath that, for me, is the welfare and well-being of athletes. And that's just very much helping athletes deal with the day-to-day thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations they're experiencing. It's not psychopathological. So by that, I mean, it's not something very serious, but it's just, again, it's part of being a human being. Somebody wouldn't have to withdraw from an event because they're suffering from a bit of ill-being, but it might impact their performance, but it impacts their day-to-day functioning. It impacts their day-to-day enjoyment of being a human being. So they've got a bit of low mood. They're suffering from a bit of anxiety about things. They've had an argument with somebody who's important to them. They're having ongoing relationship challenges or some ill health or something. Those are welfare and well-being challenges to me. Now, underneath that, I think, is the mental health piece. And that's more the psychopathological, the more pernicious stuff around serious clinical depression, personality disorders, things that aren't very nice. Even myself as a sports psychologist actually go beyond my competence level that I have to hand over to a clinical psychologist. So I think that's important for your listeners to hear, is this understanding of, there's different types of psychology that are relevant in the environment. I think when we're talking about, when you say mental health, I would include well-being and welfare into that. And I think I think both are better treated now. We just need to continue to get the message out there and to continue to help coaches, governing bodies, organizations, clubs, teams understand this landscape, but also understand this landscape with relevance to performance psychology, because it's all connected. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Do you think society is, in general, is still judgmental on athletes who go to see a sports psychologist? Is society in general still judgmental about that?
Yeah, can be. Again, I think it's similar to your last question in as much as I think that landscape has got so much better now. Certainly, look, if we're speaking to a global audience here, it might be that the landscape in the Philippines is different to the landscape in Russia, which is different to the landscape in Spain, which is different to the landscape in the United States, which might be different to the landscape in Brazil, the UK. So globally, there are cultural differences in attitudes towards psychology, sports psychology, and there are always going to be factions of society and cultures who say, well, seeing a sports psychologist, that's a sign of weakness. I would counter that and say it's a sign of strength, because it's a sign of understanding yourself, understanding what it is to be human. And it's engaging in stretching yourself, supporting yourself, striving to be the very best that you can be, that there are processes and practices and tools and techniques and skills and competencies out there that you can develop to be the best that you can be, to be 0.01% better, to be 0.1 second quicker, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a strength and not a weakness. I think with that, I think it's a misunderstanding of what psychology is. And again, akin to what I've just said, we need to be better at helping a global audience. And this is why it's brilliant to talk to you today in the Philippines, helping a global audience understand what psychology is, what performance psychology is, what welfare and well-being strategies are, what mental health is. I think that in the press, I can only talk about the UK, United Kingdom. I think it's mixed. I think that, and I'm surprised it's mixed. I'm surprised when there's still articles out there that mention the sports psych, and this player is seeing a sports psych, and it's almost still spoken of in terms of strange practices and alternative ideas and a bit of voodoo type thing. And it's like, no, this is very mainstream stuff now. We're a scientific discipline. If you are a qualified sports psychologist, you are underpinned by rigorous scientific evidence. So there's no need to see it as something that's alternative. So again, I think, Vincent, the best way I can answer that is it's mixed, it's better, it's mixed. We need to continue to chip away at helping people understand that is important for participants and competitors in sport.
Okay, Dan, have you had patients in the minority? The past few months, we've seen stuff like racism rear its ugly head from time to time. Have you had clients who are part of the minority who've suffered mental anguish because of this, and who've reached out to you, contacted you, asked for an appointment, asked to speak with you?
Mm-hmm. The way I'd answer that is, of late, I haven't necessarily had anybody reach out to me because of racism, because of prejudice. However, I've spoken when I've been engaged in my consultancy practice with clubs, with teams. I've sat down with players who have experienced prejudice, who have experienced racism, and had a conversation with them. And absolutely, it very much exists, and it's very much something that is a challenge for them to deal with. It's not nice. It's horrible. And so I have been somebody who's been part of the fabric of an organization when I've been involved that's helped them deal with that. Yes, absolutely.
How have you been able to stay in touch with your clients or patients despite the pandemic? What are your workarounds, and how have you been able to circumvent this pandemic to stay in touch with your clients?
exactly the same platform we're using now. I mean, Zoom, I think they've floated on the stock exchange in America now. I mean, they're huge. It's look, just using online platform. I think as a psychologist, nobody would deny that being face to face with somebody is probably the best environment to deliver in, because you better more easily pick up the social cues and clues that emanate from the person in front of you, that person brings with them. But I think for all of us, whether you're a psychologist or you're not, have become better now because I mean, the brain wires itself fairly quickly, and you become very used to the environments that you have to deliver in or be in or engage with others in. And myself, like other psychs, like business people in the corporate environment, have had to do this. And I think we've become, I mean, look at me now, I'm gesturing at you, and we just treat this as a normal conversation. So using these kind of platforms, Vincent, which I did anyway before, it's just I'm doing more of that now. And in many respects, I think it's quite good because more people are reaching out and saying, well, I'm comfortable doing this on Zoom. So for me as a practitioner, I don't have to necessarily get in the car and drive 4 hours up north, you know, to a location in England. I mean, we're still a very small country here, but it means I can work with people abroad, which I did anyway, but more so now. I just think we've become more acquainted with this. So I don't think it's to the detriment of my practice or the detriment of my ability to help somebody. I think we're becoming better and better at dealing with this kind of thing and this kind of platform. So exactly on this.
So let's say COVID ended next week. Are you still keeping this platform, or would you prefer a face-to-face conversation with your clients?
No, look, I'm still keeping this platform. I mean, I think if it's, what I would say is that, again, I think ideally you might be face to face, but I do think we now live in a world, and again, I can only speak for the United Kingdom, where we're saying, you know what, for both of our sakes, if you had to drive to me for 2 hours or I've got to drive to you for 2 hours, let's not worry about that. Let's use that time for something else more productive, and let's do this via Zoom. So I absolutely would say, whilst preferably face-to-face might be better, slightly better, it's not so much better that you wouldn't choose to do Zoom and use that 2 hours to do something else, essentially, and be more productive there. So I think what it affords us is choice with how we go about what we do. I think that if I'm delivering a group session, I think that puts an emphasis even more on being present. I do group sessions on Zoom. I've done group sessions, especially when you're being broadcasted into a room with lots of people in there. Again, I would say, if needs must, and timing was of the essence, I'd say, let's do the Zoom. You've got your team in a room. You've got 20 players in a room. I'm going to be on Zoom. I'm going to broadcast it. No problem at all. We'll do that. And I think we'll continue to get better and better at doing that. So yes, absolutely. I think in my own practice, in other psychologists' practice, and I would imagine in other businesses, in other lines of work, this kind of, whether it's Zoom or another platform, you know, we'll be utilizing this more and more.
Okay, how do you see your profession evolving in the next several years? Do you see more teams, more associations? In the process of taking care of their players, they want. I'm guessing they want a holistic type of management and taking care of their players, which includes mental. Do you see more teams, more organizations, organizations hiring sports psychologists?
I do. I think that started already. I think that clearly resources are the limiting factor here. If we go over to America, there isn't an NFL team, an NBA team who doesn't have mental health provision. And again, I'm going to discriminate between mental health and performance psychology there. They have mental health provision. They don't necessarily have performance psychology provision, is my understanding. I know in baseball, MLB, that actually almost the other way around, they're very performance psychology driven for various reasons. So that landscape in America is happening already. There are obviously lots of colleges who have sports psychology provision. Over here in the UK, it's in the Olympic sports. I don't think there's an Olympic sport that doesn't have sports psychology provision. Great Britain have finished, I think, third, and second in the last 3 Olympics in the medals table, or third, second, I think. And I think they would, people within those teams would say sports psychology has played a big part of that. A part of it, not everything, but that holistic, as you say, approach, that integrated approach. In, let's say, our national sport, football, in football, more and more clubs are utilizing sports psychology. Clearly, clubs who are lower down the leagues, who don't have the kind of resources, just won't be able to pay for it. So that's where sports psychology needs to find a way to work with and through coaches. That might be through qualifications with national governing bodies. It might be through online courses. All of my work, I give 90% of my work away, writing on LinkedIn, Facebook, using Twitter, my blog, my podcast, the Sports Site Show. Most of my work is given away free. So that's kind of education within itself. And there are so many more resources out there now for people. So I think, to come back to your question, I think where you might see the change, or where I hope there's a change, is from the performance psychology perspective, whereby if we take a sport like football, soccer, the coaching staff take it so seriously that I, as a sports psychologist, am told, you've got to get your boots on. You've got to get your boots on. You've got to come out on the grass with us, and you've got to deliver on the grass with us in our sessions, in our activities. You've got to be on hand to reinforce your messages to players. Because from a performance psychology, and I know we're here to talk about mental health, but mental health and well-being stems from performance psychology. When you're delivering on the grass, it gives players skills and competencies that helps them deal with the day-to-day ups and downs that they're experiencing, and so helps them with their welfare and well-being and subsequent mental health. Doesn't always help because there's a slightly different dynamic there, but it can start there. So I think that's important to say. So that's where I hopefully would see the shift if we come on to sports psychology in general, is actually, I've got to be on the court with the tennis player. I've got to be on the course with the golfer. I want to be right next to the ring with the boxer. I want to be next to the ring with Manny Pacquiao there, right? Yeah. I want to, not that Manny Pacquiao probably needs my help, but I'm just saying, I want to be on the pitch with the coaches, with the players, feeding back, reinforcing, advising where I can. Now that's truly powerful sports psychology.
All right, Dan. I know. Before we went online, you said you had a hard stop at 10. So, as my last question, and this is deviating from our topic. How do you see England doing in the Euros?
I wrote. I've spoken a lot about England over the years, and please let me answer it in this way. It's going to be a slightly long-winded way, but I want to do it
Sure.
because I think this is a complex topic. Before I became a sports psychologist, I was a professional golfer and then a golf coach. I know how challenging it is to play at the very highest level of sport. I know how challenging it is physically, technically, tactically, and mentally. The historical context with English football and the England team is that there's so much pressure on them to be able to win, basically win games, top the group, beat the best teams, go and win the Euros and the World Cup. And the reality is we haven't won a World Cup since 1966. There's huge amounts of pressure. So I understand why the England players find that suffocating and are really challenged by it. And I think historically they have been, that they're very good players, but they've tended to play with inhibition. They've tended to play inhibited. They've tended to play on the back foot rather than the front foot. They've tended to play, as I say, inhibited with a bit of fear rather than freedom. They've tended to play not to lose rather than to win. And I understand, because I had that in golf. I understand, I can feel it now. I know exactly what that's like. And having had the opportunity over the last 15 years to work with a number of players who have played for England and talk to a lot of past and present players, they talk about how difficult it is with the world attention, the media attention, the attention in England. And so they do play with a bit of inhibition. So I think there's a mental problem or mental challenge there. It's not to say it's not complex and there's not other challenges, technical, physical, but there's some challenges. And so I think that the current coaching staff are trying to work really hard on that side of the game. I think they're doing a great job at the moment of doing that. I think it's enormously challenging to do. I think that they're now playing, as we're recording now, they're going to play Germany next week. I think it's next Tuesday. Historically, we've tended to lose against Germany. I mean, one win in 2001 where we beat them 5-1, which was extraordinary. We've tended to lose to Germany, who are just phenomenal footballers. I'd love to see them win. I think it's going to be tough. If they do win, they're on the side of the draw that's a slightly easier side, because you've got Italy and Belgium and Holland in the other. We've got Holland in our side. So, but we've got to beat Germany. I think if they get past Germany, they've got a chance to win. I think it's 50-50 against Germany. I would give the Germans the slight upper hand. So the way I'd answer that is if they can get past Germany, they could win. I think it's going to be tough for them to get past Germany. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes. I would say a safe answer then.
Yes. I'm hedging my bets, but I think overall, I think it's a very interesting landscape. They're a very interesting case study, the English football team, because it is a case study of, and again, I'm not ignoring the complex landscape of tactics and the physical side, but they do play inhibited, and I understand why. Can the players and the coaching staff work together to overcome that? I think they're working really hard on that. They acknowledge it. They're striving to do that. We'll see what happens.
All right. Dan, before I have you say your final words to our viewers, if you don't mind, if we can have a photo for posterity.
Okay.
All right. 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay, I want to, before we end, Dan, any final words for our viewers?
I suppose my final word would be, even if you don't know about sports psychology, there's a lot of resources out there now that even just a basic Google search, sports psychology, whatever your favorite sport is, boxing psychology, football psychology, tennis psychology, whatever it is, the mental side of, Google that, learn one technique or tool, and you'll find you'll be able to use that technique or tool in your everyday life. So that's what I would say, is just strive to be curious, and especially if you're a bit skeptical, and it's fine to be skeptical. If it's something new to you, you're bound to be skeptical, because you might see sport through the prism of physicality, or you might see sport through the prism of the lens of technique or tactics, and that's completely understandable. I would say be curious. Just start to Google it, start to explore a little bit, see what's out there. Listen to my podcast, if I may say. I'm sure you'll give me an opportunity to give some links, and go from there, build from there. You know, it's psychology is very broad and it's very deep, and it can be quite intimidating. Just give yourself, begin at the beginning, learn one thing, and then build from there.
All right. On that note, Dan, I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. I know you're a busy man. Thanks for having the time to join us. And that ends our episode on the inner workings of the inner mind of an athlete with Dan Abrams. So see you tomorrow for another episode of Sports for All. And with that, we bid you adieu, and good night. Stay safe, everyone. So long.